Thanks for joining us today, guys. We are going to just have a little short tech talk today regarding AI and your business. Basically, just artificial intelligence, chat GPT, and some other generative AI that you may have seen and heard on the news, especially recently. And Henry is going to go over how that's going to affect your business and what you can do to secure your business in the world of AI. So I'll pass that over to you, Henry, and get us started.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're so glad to be here with y'all today. It's a pretty important subject that we've got to talk about. And I think one of the important things that we can put in place before we dig in really heavy here is that this is evolving so fast. We're not going to cover everything that we need to know for the next 20 years. This is a conversation for today and what we know about this subject and how it affects everybody's business is probably going to be different by about 5 p.m. today as somebody invents some new thing somewhere. So that said, let's dig into it. Before we get too far into it, oops, I scooted past a little too far. Before we get too far, want to quick notice everybody that April 12th, we're going to have our birthday party. It's going to be a hoot. We've got some really good expert speakers coming in, a ton of fun things happening. It's at a location here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we're going to send out invites. If you don't find an invite in your inbox, then just email us or call because it's going to be incredibly educational, and a lot of fun. So we want to make sure that you're there. So, all right, that said, let's dig in just kind of high level on the basic idea here. Look, we get the conversation all the time here at Turnkey about like, what do I need to do to protect my computers? And I think we've looked at a lot of different things over the years, like you got to start with a risk assessment, get a good inventory, get your email protected, passwords, cybersecurity training, all these different tools based on like National Institute of Standards and Technology, HIPAA, CISA, IBM, Microsoft, all the big studies out there. And if we put enough of these tools in place to defend against cyber attacks, then we have a pretty decent stance. We're a little safer than we were before. Hopefully, we're harder to hack than the other guys. And we have a really good defense system. Now, if you're looking at a big enough screen, I intentionally put these protections, these little blocks, a little spaced out apart, just because I want to paint the picture here that look, all of these defenses and implemented really, really well are never going to be enough. They're never going to be perfect. And there's always, even before artificial intelligence, there's always been some sort of small vulnerability somewhere, a misconfiguration or a new system that gets put into place and it's a couple hours before the antivirus gets rolled onto it or something. So there's always these little tiny cracks in our systems. And we always tell customers, look, to be perfectly safe, we've got to literally be perfect. For the hackers to get you, they've got to get lucky. And unfortunately, what's happening now is those little tiny cracks in our defenses, those little tiny mistakes, those little tiny places where we think it may not be that big of an issue, those are the places that artificial intelligence is able to make use of those holes and exploit them and get us into that situation where files are ransomed and data is exploited and breached out on the web. So there's so many things that we can talk about. I want to make sure that we put it in some perspective that this is artificial intelligence is both a phenomenal tool that you can use to protect and grow and evolve your business, but it's also potentially a really big threat. So that said, what we want to look at is just at a high level, what is ChatGPT? It's one of those AIs or artificial intelligences that more and more people are experimenting with. That we've got a lot of people that have asked us, okay, what is ChatGPT? How do we use it in our business? At the most basic level, ChatGPT is what we would call a generative AI or generative artificial intelligence. It's a type of this overall class of technologies, roughly called AI, that's designed to generate content. Generative AI can create pictures. It can create software code. Text, any kind of stuff. We're seeing tons of books show up on Amazon that are 100% AI created. It works by it works by analyzing patterns like big data and generating based on trends new data that appears to be or can feel human generated. There's uh, there's the kind of the next question of, okay, well then, like, where do we see this in the world today? Well, the big ones, like we mentioned, are ChatGPT. You may have played with it already. If you've got Internet Explorer, its new version called Edge, if you've got Edge on your computer and you're staying up to date, you've got access to some degree of Microsoft's Copilot. Or if you play in the Google space, you've got access to Google's version of AI called Bard. The ChatGPT company called they also have an image creating product called Dolly, and those are these are just a tiny little subset of the thousands of companies working really fast as we speak to create new products in this space. So there's a million of them. Now, how do they work? It's important to understand a little bit of the fundamentals about what this is and kind of how it's working and where does it come up with these ideas. We kind of have a fairly decent idea for how people come up with ideas and how people evolve or learn or grow in their lifespan. But AI at the moment, there's kind of three ways that we're training it or building its knowledge base and giving it the ability to create content. One is deep learning. This is one of the hot subjects. This is one that may have the most promise in the future. It involves what the researchers and developers are calling a neural network. And it's literally modeled after the human brain, and it's designed to learn. So without going into gross detail, understand that that's kind of a future thing, and it's in some degree it's in use today. So the AIs out there, especially like ChatGPT and Copilot, are working. They're working hard to make those things really learn from and create kind of the next generation of data based on what they learn. But an important thing to understand is that at the moment, and certainly in the past, and probably forever, these generative AIs are creating content based on data. The ChatGPT product, it was original. One of its original data sources was all of Reddit, and it digested all the data on there, and they used that as kind of the basic learning set to say, okay, based on all this is how people talk. This is a lot of information, and they've given it data since then. They've fed in books and tons of other websites and other resources, but it can analyze all that data and build trends based on that. So it's important to understand that generative AI is starting to be able to learn, but it's kind of cut its teeth based on reading a ton of data from these websites and other data sources that it's fed, and looking for trends or doing a statistical analysis. As these models and as the AIs grow, it's becoming more and more sophisticated and getting harder to discern what was AI generated and what wasn't. And there's a ton of really interesting conversations about that. But keep in mind this idea of training on data as we talk for just a second, all right? Because that's going to play into this. It's really important to understand that. The old model of computer programming of garbage in, garbage out works really well, and it applies perfectly to ChatGPT and all these generative AIs, that they're only as good as the data that they're working from, especially at the moment here today. So how are you able to use AI? There's there's thousands, and people are building a chat GPT store based applications as we speak. We've lost count of how many companies there are working on new ways to use AI. But right this second, as we speak, if your computer is roughly up to date, if you're using Edge, just scroll up and you've got access to Copilot. You know, when you open your homepage, right there, if you ask a question of your browser, and if you look in the right area, your browser is connected to an AI called Copilot. Or if you're using Google, some of the Bard tools. If you haven't played with it, it's pretty educational in terms of what the concept is. But ChatGPT is pretty cool. The OpenAI platform, more and more people have access to that now. It used to be pretty restricted, and it's gotten to where it's pretty accessible. You can probably make an account today and be playing with that in the next 15 minutes. And it's really kind of a lot of fun. You can ask it to write you a poem or, you know, create a story. It's amazing what it can do. It's one of the generative products, and it creates text. It's its sister product, DALL-E, from the OpenAI company, is built to generate pictures. Microsoft Copilot, if you have Office 365, they have a paid version of Copilot that can do more and more. It can read into a ton of the different Microsoft applications. But Microsoft Copilot is kind of this umbrella name that they're using for a lot of their AI products. Right now, there's 1,000 things it can do, but one of the cool things that it's able to do, it pops up on my phone when I get a Teams message, and it asks, hey, do you want to summarize this conversation? If I'm driving, it'll say, hey, do you want to summarize this conversation? And it'll just speak out to me kind of a summary of a long email. It's really powerful with that. And it's not perfect. I have seen some interesting summaries come across my phone. It can assist with writing. It can do a pretty good job of rephrasing sentences, helping you make it sound a little bit more polished or a little bit more relaxed, or kind of whatever your tone is. So it's pretty powerful with that. If you plug in Copilot and you look at some of the paid versions of Copilot, it can look at Power BI. It can analyze huge chunks of your spreadsheets and help you generate trend lines and kind of some deeper analysis. And that's certainly some of the bigger promises that that they're talking about at Microsoft. Other industries, every other industry, it seems like, has some software specialization where they're really pushing AI and encouraging their attendees or their industry base to use it. In medicine, it's kind of one of the fun ones to talk about. I asked Copilot just to have a little fun with this presentation, what can you use AI for in medicine? And it came up with a few good ones. I changed it up a little bit because that's what you're supposed to do. But in medicine, you know, facilitating medical training and simulations, assisting in clinical diagnosis. This is according to Copilot, what AI and Copilot can do, contributing to drug development, automating administrative tasks, and study analysis. Now, these are some great things, and it sounds like a really good idea if you could feed every medical journal, and if you could if you could have an AI look at all of your x-rays and blood work and all of your medical history and digest all of that in a way that no human doctor could do in space of seconds, and just know everything there is to know about you from all of your medical history. It sounds like on paper that it should be able to give the perfect diagnosis right now for whatever your situation is. The medical industry also is a phenomenal example of some of the big risks for an ungoverned AI implementation. It still requires human oversight because of simple things like social variables. It is not yet able to interpret, like, if you're of this ethnic background, or if you're from this socioeconomic level or status, or or neighborhood or whatever. There's some things we are starting to learn are different about some people based on where they grew up, what their genetic background is, and or other things that may not be readily available in their medical chart. Translation mistakes. If we use AI to translate all of the dictation notes or the complaint notes from a patient, let's say they come in and they're speaking a language that your clinic doesn't speak, and you use an AI to translate that and you just accept it on face value. What if it made a mistake? What if it translated, they had a broken heart because they broke up with their spouse? What if it translates that as they had a heart attack, and you proceed down the path of giving them medicine that might be relevant for a heart attack? It's still susceptible to cyber attacks, and I would bet it's going to be more susceptible than ever, or this is certainly going to be a target for the bad guys. It needs perfect data, really, and that's kind of, we've talked on a little bit on that. And without getting into too much of the weeds, there's even been some recent cases where a company did something, had some legal repercussions, or maybe the chat bot on their website said something, and the company had to honor the deal that the chat bot made, or had to walk back some of the rather embarrassing or maybe very inappropriate things that the chat bot said, because maybe the chatbot was reading remember, the data that it uses is how it can present and generate new information. Maybe the chatbot was generating its information using an internal message board or a SharePoint web resource, or your emails to generate its information, or who knows where it got its information, or what statistical algorithm it used to generate its content. But if it says it, if the chatbot says it, or the AI generates chart notes or makes recommendations, and you implement those things, or the customer sees those, who's legally responsible for that? And right now we're seeing case history where the company is held liable for the things the chat or the AI generates or says. On the flip side, it's important to note that there's great uses for AI right now, in terms of in our industry, in information technology, behavioral analysis, threat analysis, resolution summary, kind of understanding the path that a particular help desk or ticket came through, and we're using, and I'll show you this in a second, or we'll talk more about it rather. There's some really powerful tools that allow us to kind of quickly summarize everything that's ever happened on a computer, and maybe build a trend and present some of that information to a technician in pretty factual perspective really quick, or the ability to look at what's going on this workstation in your environment, and the firewall, and maybe an external threat, and the fact that maybe your password got breached 2 weeks ago, and some of the AI tools that are coming along really nicely in the industry have the ability to crunch all of that data and say, okay, we very well may have a threat. Let's go ahead and isolate this computer within seconds, and to do those kind of things that would have in the past taken an IT person, minutes to hours to even days to understand the data and respond appropriately. IBM has this great report. I recommend everybody to read it. It's the cost of a breach report. The 2023 data, or the 2023 report, itemized some phenomenally important and useful data to understand. But one of the tables that I love looking at is, what are the things that can make a breach more expensive? Ignore the specific numbers, but look at the overall weight of that number, if you would. If you look, the number 4 thing in the 2023 report that can decrease the cost they're looking at on average like a $4 million, because globally their study came up with that the average cost of a breach was like $4.5 million. And based on that number, they said that in their studies, what they found is that if you had AI and machine learning or driven insights and like in some of your tools that kind of helped you respond to things quicker, that in general decreased the overall cost of your breach pretty heavily. Of note, 2022 survey had that as the #1 thing. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's I thought it was pretty powerful. Employee training being the #1. We'll talk about that in a second. Or #2 being the number 2 thing that can reduce the cost of a breach. We'll hit that again in just a second. Hold on to that number. So yeah, so biggest thing to note here is that using AI the right way can and is proven to really help. So we got to be careful. Some of the overall risks that we're seeing and we're taking into consideration, and I won't pound this too hard, but bias based on the data, like if the data that it's using to generate its responses is really not as well informed as we would need it to be, then it can do some damage. We played with a chat bot here at Turnkey Solutions for our website and immediately took it off after about 30 minutes because we trained it. We gave it the data set of 2 or 3 different data sets, and the answers it was given was comical and very wrong. So it was hard to pull together. Decisions made by or answers provided by AI can be seen as your company's answers. So hold on to that. Job threats. I've had this question a lot of times. Hey, look, is my job at threat of AI? Well, our jobs have changed, and I would suggest this. I was on a really good conversation with some industry experts on this, and one of them said this kind of powerful statement. He said, "You're not going to be replaced by AI more than likely, but there's a really good chance you'll be replaced by someone who's using it." So we can't stop this. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, but we've got to figure out how do we appropriately use this and use it well and safeguard ourselves and our company. So if you're not using AI, I would stop and think, okay, well, are there ways that we could just use it well? And while we're talking about that, if you don't have sufficient coverage from your insurance policy for something that might be created or caused by an AI, it would be very good time to stop and ask the insurance company, hey, are there specific riders or policy paragraphs or conditions that we need to talk about in my policy for if we use ChatGPT or something like that, or AI in our company, and it made a mistake, what would be our liability exposure? So it's a big thing there. Last thing that I'll throw out on this, that the big risks that we're cautioning our clients on is that phishing is getting better than ever. There was a case, pretty well publicized study where or breach or a cyber attack where a guy got on a Zoom call or Teams call with a bunch of people from his company. He got kind of a funny looking email, said, hey, I need you to come talk to him, jump on this Teams meeting. I don't know if it's Teams or Zoom or whatever, but this just happened. And he said, the email looked a little fishy, but he went ahead and jumped on the Teams meeting, and on the meeting was a bunch of people from his company, some of his coworkers, his boss, and he recognized them all, and they sounded right. And he's like, okay. So his guard goes down, and in the course of the conversation, the online meeting, he's instructed to make some funds transfers, and ultimately the company, he transferred like 20-something million dollars. And the end piece of this, the end result of this, or the final analysis was that 100% of the people on that call, except for him, were AI generated. So we've been talking about this for years, that this is coming, but it's here now. So you can't even trust your emails. You can't trust the people on your Teams call, your Zoom call, to be 100% without finding some way to verify that. So how do we implement controls? What do we do? Where do we start with this? And let's dig into some things that we're recommending everybody do right now, like right this minute, is start with a risk assessment. Start with, and the specific goal of this is start with looking at all of your systems. By system, I mean kind of this loose term of like your applications, the software, the operating systems, the vendors that make them, and just list those out, which, by the way, is a good process to have anyway. But for this specific exercise, list those systems out and see, do they have artificial intelligence capabilities built into them today? Or is it on maybe that company's development path? Look at their roadmap. A lot of companies will publish, here's our roadmap. And almost all of them, it feels like, are saying, okay, yeah, our next update, we're going to have ChatGPT built into it, I promise. And for good or for worse, but list all your stuff that you depend on, your EMR, your accounting, your instant messaging, your phone systems. We're seeing the phone systems are nowadays using AI to transcribe the voicemail over to text. So if you're 100% depending on that transcription to make a decision and call somebody back, do we have to stop and say, okay, maybe did it not transcribe it perfectly? So just a thought. Are your team knowingly or unknowingly using generative AI? Stop and think that and ask, like survey, how are you all using, are you using it now? This is really important. And it's important to note that, just human behavior, we're going to look for the easy path to get our job done, right? And you need to have kind of a non-threatening conversation with your team and ask them, hey, look, we're just in a discovery phase here, if you've not done anything like this, but are y'all using this at all right now? And if so, what are you doing with it? Survey your team and kind of learn this real quick. Understand, once you've built out those systems and kind of built a good inventory, start digging into what data sets are those AIs using to create answers. Is it closed? Like, is it only using your ticket system? Or is it only using your CRM? Or is it only using your internal, wiki or whatever? Or is it an open AI and it's using all of the internet to generate answers? It's really important to understand that. In the example of the chat bot that we turned down here at Turnkey, it had the option, like you could tell it only use this data set, or use this data set and the whole internet, or only use the internet. So there were a lot of options there, and your systems are going to have options along those lines too, more than likely. Write a policy and be prepared to change it. Write a policy for your team. That's we're going to talk about that in just a split second. Our internal policy, just so you know, and this is being revised minute by minute, and we're working through this. But internally at Turnkey Solutions, our internal policy is first, unless expressly allowed in the policy, it's 100% prohibited. Just don't use it. So we're being very clear with our team, and I recommend you do this as well. Like, unless we talk about it first, then no. But let's talk about it. So that would be a good first start. For Turnkey, what we've specifically said in our team is you can use ChatGPT, you can use Bard, you can use our ticket systems AI tool, and then we have a ton of different tools that we use for our clients. And case by case, we've identified these tools use AI, or they have some generative ability or machine learning or something. There's a lot of the threat hunting and extended detection and response tools that kind of connect antivirus and firewalls together. Those are using more and more. So we've specified those on a vendor or product by product basis. And then here's how we can use them. For example, and this isn't, I didn't want to bore you with the whole written policy, but internally, we're talking about, like, for ChatGPT or Bard, we can use those, and this is our policy to our employees, is you can use those to start content but all content has to be rewritten, checked, and verified. So if you kind of just trying to wrap your head around like, how do we generate a paragraph about this? That's acceptable, but you're going to have to rewrite it and check it and make sure that the facts are right, because there has been too many case studies and too many shown proofs of concept where it's just ChatGPT can come up with just the wrong answer. And it's acceptable for starting marketing or research, or if you want to, use it to start, how do I write a script to do X, or how do, what, is there a way to do this or whatever? It's great for starting that, but it cannot be your final authoritative guide for doing it. Internally, the other tool, our ticket system, it's an internal database only, and it can be used for internal communication summaries. So that's how we're using it right now, and it can generate kind of a summary of the diagnostic path, or maybe a summary of the conversation that we've had back and forth with the customer. And it can even, this is kind of a cool thing, we're playing with this tool, can kind of predict the sentiment of the end user, the customer. So it can kind of say, hey, look, this person's probably getting a little ill because this ticket's taken too long, or look at the tone of their messages. More than likely they're getting less and less happy as we go. So that's becoming a pretty cool tool. And again, all those other tools like our antivirus and firewalls, we've got specific recommendations and guides for each specific tool. So I really recommend you do this now, today. Build that inventory, figure out where your systems are, what you're using, and start building the policy around those to understand here's how we're going to use it. And one of the best pieces of advice I've seen thus far on this is this one right here. Put this at the beginning of your policy, unless we talk about it and specifically allow it, and there's no, it's not allowed. So kind of review the controls to consider today. A lot of our customers have asked us, can the firewall block it? Yeah, the firewall can block your access to the website ChatGPT, or whatever the specific URL. We can block that. We can block, the categories of access to those websites. But what we cannot do is block everything perfectly. And I can't block the overall access of your tools on the back end to access those tools. Because a lot of your tools, like if you use Office 365, there may not be a way for your firewall in your building to block Office 365 from talking to its own AI or ChatGPT or whatever tool they're using. So sculpt your use would be kind of our recommendations. Yes, the tools exist to block some things from getting into your building, but some things are generated and conducted way outside of your building, and we can't block those. So yeah, on that note, all of your software potentially is connected to some AI on its back end, and we can't really block that. So have a process to do a review and inventory, including everything, even your sales and marketing tools, to understand here's our tools, here's what we're using, and what data set does it use, how will we or are we using it right now, how could it be used, and then write that policy. And I would suggest, like, be prepared to go pull it back up in 30 days and tweak it, because these things are changing just too fast to say, okay, here's our policy and it's good for the next year. Fifth thing is please double down on phishing training, or phish testing and cybersecurity awareness training. You've got to show your people, your teams, some of those videos of like the fake Teams conversations. If you're not doing training right now that's automated, then you're really missing out on that, and you need to. But I would look, if you're one of our clients and you're doing automated training, I would suggest go ahead and ask, and let's bring your team custom training or two on this, of like, let's go ahead and bump up the agenda. Let's talk about this very specific concept of like the old phishing emails with really bad typos and the kind of the predictive scam of the Nigerian prince. That doesn't happen anymore. Nowadays, they're perfectly written emails specific to you, and or worst case scenario, like people on the Teams meeting with you aren't even real. So that's kind of our today summary of what's going on, what to do, what to think through. And again, I really don't intend for this to be everything you need to know about artificial intelligence in 30 minutes. What we're talking about today is like some ideas for how to start your conversation internally at your company about our AI. Hopefully this has been somewhat maybe thought-provoking on a few things. If you've got questions, if you want us to try to block some stuff or help you with that inventory of your systems to figure out, what do we have that could be AI integrated, and how do we dig in a little bit more specific on any of these things, then we would love to do that with you. We're more than glad to. Email us at ask@tcas.la. Watch for our birthday party invite. And if you don't get one, again, that's April 12th, just in 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks. If you don't get that invite, then by sometime mid next week, then go ahead and ask us for it. And we would love to have you there. We'll look forward to whatever's coming next. We've got a ton of really good resources and webinars coming up. We've got one on hyperconverged servers with a phenomenal resource coming up in about a month. And again, our birthday party, we're going to have some phenomenally educational speakers there. So we look forward to helping you. If you've got questions or comments, then we look forward to helping with that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this stream and this conversation here. And we hope that you are having a great day and a safe day. And if there's anything that we can do to help, then please let us know. And we look forward to being a part of your success and your growth. Thank you very much and have a great day.